Hi, my name is Lacey Worthington. I am a high school math teacher in a rural school district, and I analyze the K-12 Ohio mathematics curriculum. To get started, I kind of looked to see if I could find a specific mission statement for the Ohio Department of Education, and I couldn't find a specific mission statement on their website, so then I looked further, more specifically at math, and the department that I ended up kind of working with and looking closely at was the Office of Curriculum and Assessment, and they did not have a specific mission statement either, but they did have a mission vision on their ESSA plan that said, in Ohio, each child is challenged to discover and learn, prepared to pursue a fulfilling post-high school path, and empowered to become a resilient, lifelong learner who contributes to society. So here's just a little background. Ohio opened request for online test administrators in 2013. They did a trial period with PARCC and AIR. PARCC developed the Common Core and then based their test questions off of that. Teachers did not like it. So Ohio left PARCC, and then Ohio contracted with AIR. AIR works a little differently. They look at the state's specific standards and then develop test questions based on that. Then once AIR develops those test items, the Ohio Department of Education reviews them, and they also have committees of teachers that review those items as well. So how these committees are set up and how this works, and I know I'm focusing a lot on the test and the standards, but Ohio's curriculum is a standards-based curriculum, and so I know that there's a lot of focus on the standards. So Ohio educators are mainly what make up these committees, and every 5 years the standards are looked at and revised, and this is kind of a long process. So here's how the process works. There's 2 committees, and they're from different parts of the states, teachers of students with disabilities, high achieving students from urban, suburban, rural areas, and even parents serve on these committees. Each committee is broken down into subcommittees, and those subcommittees are based on grade level. And then those subcommittees meet for vertical alignment and make more edits as needed. After these edits, the standards are pushed through to the next committee that's subbed in the same way, and then they make the final changes, the state board approves them, and no more edits are to be made until the next revision year. And the entire process takes several months. I was also interested in how politics play into our Ohio curriculum and the standards that are involved. What I found looking online was that the state law requires standards and requires that the standards be posted and acceptable. And then it's up to the state to make a model curriculum. So our teachers have kind of a reference point in districts, but it's not a law that teachers use the model curriculum necessarily, so they can develop their own curriculum based on district and department standards. So the law also requires that there's an achievement test given then at the end of the year that measures how students are doing on those standards. And then the law also requires that the states consult with parents, teachers, etc. when revising those standards. So one thing that I noticed whenever I was looking at all these different grade levels of curriculum is that it's really well structured on the Ohio Department of Education website. The links are easy to get to and click and follow. They had the 2011 standards available as well, and they also had a comparison of 2011 to our current standards available. And they didn't just have a model curriculum for every grade. They also had a model curriculum with instructional supports. However, the instructional supports were not quite available yet for all grades, but they will be soon. They also offer lots of professional development. They're easy to contact and get a hold of. The Ohio Department of Education, specifically that Department of Curriculum and Assessment. I called them a couple of times and emailed them a couple of times, just trying to work through some questions I saw when I came across things on the website, and they're very good to work with. And then there's also local areas that are kind of outsourced that work for the state but also help the districts. Like we have the Ohio Valley Educational Service Center. So the model curriculum, if I compare it to how we made our curriculum maps, and for this course 511, the model curriculum, theirs contains these like areas, these headings kind of. They have the expectations for learning, the content elaborations, the instructional strategies, and the instructional tools and resources. Then they also have the model curriculum with instructional supports. And so that's just like a more detailed section of the instructional strategies. They also had a model curriculum for like conceptual categories, which is interesting because if you look at the state standards and like the blueprints, they try to tell you like what percentage of what is good for like the test and what you should cover more thoroughly than others. But there's always that area of conceptual category, and so that can kind of help educators to see what they're talking about there. They also had a gap analysis document, which I thought was interesting to kind of help teachers know what did they miss from the previous year, or if they're not understanding some standard or they're having a hard time mastering that concept in the curriculum, how can we address it? How can we fix it? That was only available at the high school level. And then they also have critical areas of focus, which were a resource available at the high school level. They kind of show a big idea kind of what some of the more power standards might be, but they were not too specific. I know that they're a big picture, but it was still like a lot involved in each of the big pictures. So it's a little overwhelming. So one thing that I noticed when I was looking at the content of the K through 12 curriculum, and I looked a little bit more closely at the 7th grade math because that's what I teach. I did not think that they had much consideration for students with disabilities or help on that model curriculum for students who are struggling learners or might have a disability of some sort. They did have supports for English language learners, but I did not really see much support for students with a learning disability, whatever the specific learning disability might be. And they do have these depth of knowledge documents that I found very helpful. I did not see them on the state's website, but they were made available to me through the Ohio Valley Educational Service Center. And I also thought they did a really good job comparing, whenever I looked at the content of the curriculum, the model curriculum points out specifics on like how, what they learned in 6th grade, and so how I should be building on that for 7th grade. So it kind of helps the teacher to know, like, okay, this is what the standard says, but what does that mean? And how am I supposed to be applying that and helping these 7th graders to grow? Because really, the state wants to see your students' growth. I also did not see in the content of the curriculum very many connections to careers, or the instructional support section in the model curriculum was filled with examples that teachers could use, And a lot of those examples were not just memorization, 2x equals 14, solve for x. And they weren't just examples. They were how do you do examples that help kids build understanding, not just memorization? So I really was thinking that was pretty good, but there weren't very many activities. I was hoping myself personally to find some activities for kids that might help them to kind of learn at their own pace, or for it to be a little bit more hands-on. Certain things in math are a little hard to do that way, and there actually wasn't too much in the model curriculum as far as addressing that part of getting the content across to kids who might be a different style learner, kinesthetic, etc. I also didn't think that a lot of the problems in the instructional supports really connected to real life. Some of them did, but I just have found that kids are more interested if they can connect to it, and they're more willing to really apply themselves to the problem. And I felt like in general, the model curriculum really matches the standards, which of course it does. It's all been made by the state. But the model curriculum does not go into too much depth with each standard. It kind of just focuses on hitting each standard. And there are so many standards. It's like, how can you possibly cover that in one school year? And the model curriculum also did not have too many tips for technology or how to integrate technology into a lesson or an activity or whatnot. And I just thought that was important because we're dealing with 21st century learners now. The last thing before I get to the critique, which I guess I've kind of been critiquing this the whole time as I record, but the assessment parts. So obviously the state test, which I've kind of talked briefly about the history of it and how we are, why we're where we are with the AIR test right now. But the questions are created by AIR to match Ohio standards. They're reviewed by teachers. Students who take algebra and geometry have to get a certain score to be able to earn a diploma. Students with disabilities have accommodations, but the test is not modified in any way unless the student is in the multiple handicapped room or something. Then they can take an alternate assessment. And then this test is also a lot weighs on it, as we've discussed in this class. It weighs on teacher evaluation, district grade card, and all sorts of those things. And I really didn't think that there were too many resources available. They have a whole practice site, but the practice site has a practice test available for the grade level. But I didn't think those questions matched too well with the released items. They have released a few items from the last couple of years. But I think we need more than that. And then when you look at the model curriculum specifically, not just talking about the state assessment at the end of the year, how they assess, if the standards are being addressed, but in the model curriculum itself, there is not really any support for formative or summative assessments or how teachers should be assessing based on the curriculum. And I actually asked via email about this, and they said that we really want to leave that up to the districts and individual teachers, which I understand, but at the same time, the model curriculum is just a guide, and having those assessment elements or examples would be helpful. As a 7th grade math teacher, I'm thinking, I want to know what kinds of questions I should be asking on, my unit test to see if they're mastering the standards the same way that the state's going to measure it. So overall, I thought I really did like the vision statement. The ESSA plan is the future kind of Ohio education, what we're looking at. And so I really did like that they, pointed out more than one pathway after graduation, and that we want these students to be productive members of society. I think that the vertical alignment between the classes was really a positive thing. I loved how I could look back as a 7th grade teacher and see, I didn't even have to flip back or click on the 6th grade curriculum a lot of times because it was embedded right there in the 7th grade model curriculum. In 6th grade, they should have done this. So what we think you should be doing in 7th grade is this. And I thought that was really helpful. There's a lot of support for teachers, which I think I already discussed, but I think that's a really positive thing. You can get your questions answered and don't have to, wonder about it. And the content itself of the model curriculum, I thought overall taught for understanding, not just memorization, which as a math teacher is something I find is really important, and not all of our kids get that at every level. So like one specific example is when teaching ratios and proportions at the 7th grade level, the model curriculum and the instructional supports had an example talking about how you set up proportions. And, where I might tell kids, like, you just want to keep things lined up. If inches is on the top and one fraction and feet's on the bottom, then in your other fraction you want it the same way. But the model curriculum had like a diagram that showed the vertical and horizontal alignment and the relationship between them. And I just thought that was a really beneficial tool and something that we should focus on in our curriculum, the content of our curriculum. Also, the model curriculum is really aligned to the standards, which we expect because it's all done by the same place. However, the fact that it matches up isn't necessarily a great thing because there are so many standards to cover, but you can't dive too deep into any one standard and still expect to get through the curriculum in one school year. There were some type of like critical areas of focus, but those critical areas of focus, I wouldn't necessarily call them like power standards or like these are the big ideas they have to have before they leave 7th grade. And I also thought that the curriculum lacked real-world examples, getting kids to think about careers, and just allowing students time to think and create on their own and kind of discover and get interested, which we kind of discussed in this class when we talked about the Apple store, how when you first walk in, there's, it's like the playroom, and we don't allow kids to do that, and the model curriculum made by Ohio does not address that need for kids at all to get them hooked or interested. I also thought that there were some developmentally inappropriate aspects of the curriculum. If you compare, which was easy to do on the ODE website, if you compare the 2011 curriculum to the current curriculum in 2017 when they revised it, there are some differences, and those differences, a lot of them have bumped up when the standard is being taught. And I did not see on the site standards before 2011, but that's when I was in school, and I can specifically remember learning in Algebra 2 what we're now teaching our kids in Algebra 1. And some students are not developmentally ready for this. So we're placing students on that advanced track, which was a push. A few years ago, we wanted several of our students to be taking algebra by a certain time, and our students are not having success at this, or even if they're having success as a 7th grade advanced student, an 8th grade advanced student, a freshman advanced student, at some point it's catching up with them when they're taking Algebra 2, and then after that, the higher maths, pre-calc, calc, probability and statistics, those things. And I also did not find that there was enough support for students with learning disabilities in the instructional supports part of the model curriculum. I'm also not a big fan of the state assessment. I do think that accountability is necessary, And so I understand like the purpose of the state test made by the state, but I don't think that it shows student growth well. Their questions are all at grade level, and so if I'm asking a whole bunch of 7th grade questions, there should be a majority of kids that can answer, but I work in special ed a lot, and there are kids who are grade levels behind. I've still seen them grow, probably a year's worth of growth, but then they take a state test at the end of the year that has all these 7th grade questions on it, and I just got them doing some of the 6th grade level stuff. And so I just really think that there should be a better way of measuring student growth versus just have they mastered these 7th grade standards. So this concludes my presentation, and here are the list of things that I referenced throughout the presentation, including the links to the website pages that I referenced with the model curriculum and the model curriculum with instructional supports for 7th grade.